Welcome to the Do Good Work podcast, where do good work is a way of living, where we highlight the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve a new level of excellence in all areas of your life. Today, we talk to Tevis Trower, founder and CEO of Balance Integration and the author of the Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. She knows that building a great organization begins with cultivating true greatness from the very top and within. Tavis is a pioneer in optimizing corporate cultures and has been heralded as the corporate mindfulness guru for the new millennium. Tevis has coached high performers and top executives for powerful organizations ranging from Disney to Morgan Stanley in leveraging their most precious asset, their humanity. She's on a mission to help leaders understand that your greatness is your organization's greatness. And Tevis, thank you so much for being on.
I'm so happy to be here, Raul. Thank you.
And before we got on, we talked about, there's I wouldn't call them games, but let's just call them games for simplicity's sake. But there's usually in conversations, there's the game of conversation, but under there's the inner line works, an inner line game within a conversation. Same thing with business and career. And you were discussing that, a lot of people who either listen to the show or listen to anything in regards to becoming a better version of yourself or just increasing your potential and excellence. We play that quote unquote game, that routine, that persona. We become that. But then there might be this misalignment where you reach a milestone, but that doesn't really align with who you are. It doesn't really align with the actual inner game that you're talking about. I'd love for you to dive into your experience with that and how you work with leaders, kind of create that alignment and why there's misalignment.
Oh my gosh, it's such a this is my favorite thing to think about because when I look at high performers across any field, industry, practice, right? All of us spend entire lives honing skills, right? We are the people who wake up and at some point, probably by the time we're 5 or 6, we've made a decision that we're going to go for it in some way, right? We're kind of going to grab life by the horns. We're going to suck from the marrow, right? To really win, right? And in some field. And if we're given words or support around intentionality, we hear a lot about our values, right? And we hear a lot about being an ethical person and being a whole person. But meanwhile, the reinforcement that we get is really around these benchmarks, right? Whatever the metrics are in the field of choice, right? Whether it's a title, whether it's having sold a company, whether it's personal things that we want to have, the house, the helicopter, right? The spouse, the kids, all these things, right? And because we are organized, we're self-organized around accomplishment, there's an assumption that if we keep our eye on the prize, that along with that prize is going to come fulfillment. And one of the things I've really seen, specifically once we've achieved enough, right, and we realize it's never going to be enough. Right. We realize there's kind of a rude awakening, a disillusionment, right? That, oh my gosh, I thought by now I would feel better. I thought by now I would have more of a sense of what my life is about. I thought by now I would have. And if you want to take that phrase and fill in your own ... I thought by now I would have. And see where your instinct goes. Does it go towards the next accomplishment? Or can you turn that phrase into some aspect of your relationship with yourself and with life itself that has yet to be fulfilled? And that's really where your crux is, right? That's really where the entry point is for how do you need to change your game? Because I'm willing to bet your people who listen to this, Raul, they are really good at their game, right? They pay attention to it. They cultivate proper mindset.
Hmm.
They've got the disciplines. They've got their self-care resiliency plans. Like, they are on it, and they're experimenting and they're curious, right? So the fact that we have all these skills in place, right? The fact that we can deploy our skills to accomplish and yet acknowledge in some way that we've left a part of our being at the door is such an opening for this question. How do I deploy all these skills I've amassed over a lifetime of learning how to win and actually include my heart?
Interesting. Because you talked about earlier that when you reach a milestone, that these are all they're tangible, but they're also intangible. Like they're psychological. They're a certain level, but it's not that if I consume 10 apples, I'll get full. But if I consume 10 milestones, I might not be full. And it's continuing
Ah,
that hunger, right?
yeah, because the hunger is insatiable.
Yeah.
The hunger is actually for a deeper relationship with yourself, which isn't something our culture and leadership talks about. It's kind of interesting. A friend of mine, lovely human being, CHRO, and I'm going to protect his privacy, but CHRO in a major retail organization just published an article on trust. And his article on trust was really well thought about. It was a fairly like a balance of the academic and the real life conversation. But what I realized was nowhere in that article did he talk about fostering trust with yourself.
Hmm.
Right. So how much is our striving, or how much is the game we're playing a game that's been set up, or that we imagine has been set up by external forces in the world, and we're just trying to play so that there's some imaginary day, hopefully not in the too distant future, that we can go to bed at night and know that we are absolutely 100% okay and valid and good.
That's a deeper conversation too, because that takes a certain level of awareness. And any transformation begins with the humility and awareness. Like I don't know, like if you agree with that or not, but I believe that you have to have first humility and self-awareness in order to have any sort of change.
Well, let's turn that into a leadership conversation. How much can we lead in the absence of humility and self-awareness? Truly, how
Mm.
much can we lead, and to what end? Right? Can we be an ethical and a worthy leader in the absence of those two qualities?
No,
Yeah,
I don't think so.
yeah, I don't either. And more than that, can we be satisfied
Hmm.
in the absence of humility and self-awareness?
That is true. So they transcend both. And in your leadership, because you definitely focus on high achievers, leaders within large organizations, and also the work that you do with small businesses as the backbone of the economy. Where would you say that you find this lacking? Is it in any type of leadership position where we need to implement these principles of creating this self-awareness or the self-alignment? And I kind of want to dive into some of those principles around creating not just intentional work, but making sure that it fits, I guess, yourself, and that you're kind of mastering your internal game as you continue to build on the external game. But is this more of a corporate setting that you're seeing this, or is this more an entrepreneurship, small business setting? Can you give us some context from your experience?
Yeah. Do you know what's amazing? So I grew up in a family of rebels, right? I grew up in a family of black sheeps. My dad was a Montessori teacher. We went to communes. We went to Native American stuff, to Seder suppers, right? We just, anything out there. My family was very embracing and aware. And I have been myself in settings ranging from being an Army reservist to working for the Speaker of the House, right? To leading retreats for Harvard Business Review, to facilitating culture shift for Chanel, right? And all of their high performers. Like I've really worked with people across the broad spectrum. And now my passion is high performers, because I think that high performers, high achievers, high contributors,
Hmm.
that when they bring a greater connection to self to what they do, then the world shifts. Not only does it shift for them, because suddenly they're not just achieving these milestones, but they're doing it in fulfillment, right? They're doing
Hmm.
it in connection to self. Um, so that's my passion point. The amazing thing about writing this book is the number of people from the broad spectrum of the world, whether it's a music producer, whether it's an NYC public school teacher,
Hmm.
right, have come to me saying, wow, here I am. I've studied all these things, whether they've got a practice in Buddhism or yoga or whatever, you name it. Oftentimes this impetus to turn and more deeply access their truth. Now I call this radical success, right?
Hmm.
Because the word radical does not mean extremist. From the Latin, it actually comes from the word root.
Hmm.
So what is truly deeply rooted in your being as who you are, and how do you bring that into your formula of success, into your um, self-expression? And part of what I've seen is no matter who you are, you can bear to shore that up. And in
Hmm.
doing so, you're going to be a lot happier. And so when you ask me, is this true in nonprofits? Is this true in for-profits? I say, I actually think this is part of the journey of being a truly self-expressed and contributing human being, is
Hmm.
connecting to this aspect of self and then bringing it to bear while we're flexing all those skills that help us hit all the benchmarks that we've agreed that we want to hit. So I think it's really a part and parcel kind of conversation.
No, that makes a lot of sense because we're all created unique and we all have these different talents. It's just being able to kind of foster that and channel that, like you mentioned, into your
Yeah.
leadership realm, whether that be small business, corporate, nonprofits, for profit, et cetera. Can you explain to me the relationship that leaders have with discomfort and your view on why discomfort is not a bad thing?
Oh, well, the funny thing is, right, our nervous system is really set up to both um, focus on our discomfort, right? Because the nervous system is scanning and it's looking for threat. Okay, great. Well, the thing is, our nervous system is doing that while our impetus or our urge inside of ourselves is to make that threat go away. So, what do we end up doing? We end up running from it. We end up trying to escape it. We end up trying to destroy it, right? We end up trying to mask it. And what most of the wisdom traditions will say is that we actually should be walking closer to our discomfort to understand it, because therein oftentimes lies our greatest opportunity. If
Mm.
something's uncomfortable to you, if something really pushes your buttons, right? Our first thing is, oh, I'm going to kill it, right? But what a leader, going back to humility and self-awareness, right? Because you brought that up as key qualities, and I would agree, they're super, super important. But using humility to say, wow, how much does this show a weakness in me that this is so unsettling, right?
Mm.
And then self-awareness is that willingness to move into it and say, what is it I need to learn to be even stronger because of this? And that's such a huge pivot. So when I talk to leaders and we look at their sources of discomfort, that's the aha, not how genius they are,
Mm.
right? Not how they nailed X, Y, or Z, or how they won the negotiation, or those are all things to celebrate, absolutely. But it's that softening into the unknowing with curiosity That's where you get the exponential gains.
Interesting. That's a good perspective there. So I want to ask an additional question because we just keep at, I guess, unlocking new doors. When you step into a leadership position and you kind of have to adhere by certain rules or certain commonalities or certain formalities, and to be able to bring in that ripple effect that's already happening within you, that you already wanted to contribute to an organization, what would be, I suppose, maybe a kind of like a tactic that you work with leaders to not only apply that to the current situation, but evolve over time to make it better? Because right now, I mean, there's the existing situation, there's what you're bringing to the table. Directly going aggressive to the situation may not be the best approach. What's the best first approach? And then over time, how can we create, a symbiotic agreement between both the situation and what you can bring to the table so you can have lasting results?
Yeah, this is a really powerful question. I was coaching one of the high performers, one of the guys being groomed for C-suite at one of the world's largest private equity firms. And what was amazing is this guy was seriously a money machine. And aside from being a money machine, he was one of the best liked. He was one of the influencers, one of the stakeholders that people would turn to help define the culture, to define the norms, right? So above and beyond what the CEOs might say, he was one of those people that really set the tone within the organization. He was also really burning out. And burning out in a standpoint of, he knew how successful he had been. He knew it. He knew absolutely how much gravitas and street cred he had within the organization. And he felt somewhat imprisoned by his own success to even deviate slightly to do things that might have made himself more sustainable, right? So here he is burning out. The email's always on. The expectation he's set for himself is always responding to everything almost instantly. I know all of us can relate, right? Sometimes our success can be our prison, and sometimes these outsized expectations are not so much coming from the world around us as they are coming from within us.
You creating your own self-expectations, right? Based on what you perceive to be the demand, and then you setting those expectations.
Yeah. I played this game so well, and now it's expected of me to always be accessible, to always have the right answer, to always be in a good mood, to always, to always. I have to. I am, right? And so this question that I posed to him is, we'll call him Jay, right? Just Jay, what if you align with what is? Really simple question. And he asked me, what does that mean? I said, what if you look at the situation as it is, that you are burning out, you're very successful, you have opportunity in the palm of your hand, and what if all of it is true? Every part of it. And he could have that sink in. And you can too, right? As you and I are sitting here, we can both think about our lives and think about the exact matrix of all the pressures and all the focus and all the forces and all the relationships between the factors, and have all of it be true. Right? All of it absolutely 100% be true. No victim status, no complaining. Oh, but if, none of that. So I said to Jay, and I want to play with you and say, okay, Raul, what if you think about your life? Because in any life, there's always things that are going great, things that are kind of concerning, right? It's kind of like the Boston Consulting Group, the marketing matrix, right? Like we all have that, right? So what if you think about your life and you go, yeah, this is all true. And what if I said to you, what if you stepped into all of it, embracing all of it, and tasked yourself with being optimal in relationship to all of it? It would mean that you wouldn't just be optimal according to these expectations that you've kind of set up, but you would actually also have to be optimal in relationship to the parts of yourself that represent your shadow, the parts of yourself that you feel somehow challenge or somehow don't comply to this overachiever kind of an image that you have of yourself. Suddenly, there would have to be room for all of it. And when you do that, you start to realize, wow, I've really set myself up to self-destruct eventually. So what it does is it starts to open up the door to say, wow, if I'm going to be optimal in relationship, even to the parts of me that I haven't made room for yet, what's my next action? And a lot of times those actions aren't quitting your job or blowing up all the success that you've created for yourself. A lot of times these actions are really small. They're really small. They're time blocking half an hour mid-afternoon because you need to get some creative work done, right? They're turning off the notifications on your phone while you're in a meeting or a negotiation. Like they're so tiny. For one man I coached, he was a senior exec at Bloomberg, and it was really hard for him to admit that there was anything that he could possibly improve because he was so married to this idea that he had nailed everything. So the only way, the tell though, was that he couldn't sleep and he was losing passion for his workout, right? So it was like two things that were kind of out of character, but he couldn't actually admit that there was anything wrong in his heart. So what we carved out for him, since he couldn't articulate a rub, right? He couldn't articulate a gap, and his story consciously was everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. But when we did some excavating and looked at what had been the happiest moments, he got back to a moment as a kid when he used to cartoon. Not going to threaten anything, right? So I said, well, what if before you go to bed every night, you make a single frame that somehow encapsulates your day? So this is tiny stuff, Raul, right?
Yeah.
This is not suddenly acting out at a board meeting. This is not quitting your job. This is not blowing up your marriage. This is 10 minutes to draw a cartoon that lets you acknowledge that you actually exist. And it was game changing for him. Everything
small,
shifted.
subtle actions.
Just really, really, really tiny things. So I think that when we have leaders that make space in their own consciousness and in their day for themselves, I think it is game changing because suddenly it makes it safe for people around us to do the same. And
to set that space and that awareness too. So I think that's important.
It's a false dichotomy that I feel like we've set up, and it doesn't only exist in corporate structures. It also exists in nonprofit structures and the public sector, et cetera, that for some reason there's no room for us to exist beyond a role that we play. And I'm really adamant that the more we bring who we are into the role that we play, the better things are for everyone. But first and foremost, ourselves, and then obviously for our teams and cultures as well. There's a ripple out.
That makes a lot of sense because like purpose is not just your current role. There's far more your like purpose of life. So that's good to have that awareness, create that. And I like the fact that you encouraged that space for team members to be able to also flourish within themselves in their own person so that when they come to work, they come at a higher level of, higher level of output, or not just higher level of happiness at that point as well. I
Yeah.
think that's like a ripple effect. But that's interesting to dive deeper on this for our listeners out there. What's the best place for people to, one, thank you for this episode, but also learn a little bit more about the tactics and how to dive deeper within, this quote unquote game?
Well, I would love to encourage you to pick up my book, The Game Changer's Guide to Radical Success. I'm really thrilled it just got included in Forbes' top 12 books for compassionate leadership, which is a huge honor. And additionally, they can check me out at balanceintegration.com. We're offering a free chapter of the book if you'd like to check it out. And also, I do pretty much weekly live streams on Wednesday evenings. They're simulcast across LinkedIn Live, 2 places on Facebook, and YouTube Live. And I try and find game changers. I look for people who are really just kicking it, but they're doing it with themselves in the picture. They're really going for it, but they aren't leaving themselves at the curb, right? They're bringing themselves along for the ride, and because of it, the outcomes and the result and the enjoyment they're having along the ride is just through the roof. So I very much encourage people. It's about half an hour, and it's just great to hear other people talk about how they go about it and how they overcome that voice, or there's many voices inside of each of us that say, simmer down, you need to just play the game, right? So those are 2 ways I'd love to offer up.
And I'll put those links as well in the show notes here on the podcast. But Tevis, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Raul.
So after my conversation with Tevis, I really appreciated the focus areas around kind of taking ownership of the areas of your life that you may have neglected in playing the game of success. And not to say that this game is a negative game, but I think it's important to, one, identify your weaknesses, because we're all human, and human is has frailty, where we have finite ends. But it's not just to highlight those and just say, okay, this is my weakness, we're over, but what you can actually proactively do after you have that self-awareness. And the thing that I love the most is that she tied not only what you do in setting the space for you to improve yourself or do better in all areas of your life, or even just to have that creative outlets that you may have neglected as you grow. I know for me personally, I used to grow up drawing cartoons, and, I haven't drawn cartoons very often. Perhaps I can do that now after listening to this episode. That's just my personal note. But also being able to have that awareness that your team needs this time for themselves as well, to flourish in their relationships with others, as well as the things that they may have neglected as they grow. So as a leader and being aware of this, I think it's really important. And I really appreciated Tevis's points and perspective on that. So that's my conversation here with Tevis. And make sure that you reach out to her either on LinkedIn. Here we have the link in the show notes, or as well just to get a free chapter of her book. And until next time, do good work.